My name's Clancy and I've worked as a PE and maths teacher between 2010 and 2018, and I'm now 12 months into a new role as the e-learning director at Step Forward IT. And as Grant mentioned, that's allowed me to work with a few different schools in the area of e-learning, and two examples that I'd like to sort of refer to throughout the presentation today from one of the schools is Salesian College in Sunbury, and I led their Schoolbox implementation, which was sort of started in 2016. We decided to sign on with Schoolbox halfway through the year, and we spent the second half of 2016 getting the product ready, working with staff and launching to students at the beginning of 2017 with a parent launch soon after that. The second example that I'd like to use today is some work that I did with Marcelin College, and I did some consulting with them last year in the second half of the year to help them get their instance of Schoolbox ready to launch with students, which happened at the beginning of this year. This is just a quick overview of today's session and some of the topics I'd like to cover. Some of them might be quite helpful if you're relatively new to building courses and units, or you're thinking about starting that process, or you're still doing that and refining it. And if you're well and truly down the path with courses and units, then hopefully there's a few takeaways today as to how you might be able to try some new things with courses and units if they already are established at your school. Before I start, I wanted to show some key focus areas, which I think are critical when you're working with Schoolbox. So things like making decisions with a specific end goal in mind, so not rushing into your decision making when you're going about setting up a module in Schoolbox. I thought it was important to show some of these points because quite often I get questions about can Schoolbox do this or can Schoolbox do that? And it's a very sort of black and white approach to looking at things in Schoolbox, which I don't always sort of tend to do. And people will often ask me, what's the best way to do it? How should I set this up? And I believe it's really important for schools to make decisions that are best for their environment. So with the examples that I'm going to show you today, I don't want you to think of those examples as potentially being the right way of doing things and the wrong way of doing things. It's just the decisions that those schools made that were best for their environment. And whether that's for the staff, for the students, for the parents, or a combination of all three, it's important to think about how can you apply the technology to your environment to get the most out of it. So to look at, sort of take a few steps back to maybe 2015 when I was teaching at Salesian, and I just started a new role in the digital learning space, and we were trying to get the most out of our learning management system that we had at the time, and we were struggling with it. It was a bit of an uphill battle, and some of you who might have recently switched over to Schoolbox or are thinking about doing that, you'll have your own reasons for that move, and quite often it can be a process where you outgrow your previous system, and you're looking for a new system that can address some of the priority areas for your school. And for us, we'd been trying to set up an online course space in our previous system, and we were able to do it, but it wasn't what we wanted. The end product was very clunky. It didn't look great, as you can see from some of the visuals on the screen, and it was very difficult to manage permissions and get content that was really accessible to staff and students. So that was one of the points of reflection where we sort of thought maybe we need to start to look at what's out there in the learning management system space, and which eventually, that process of review and setting up some criteria about what we were looking for led us down the path of Schoolbox. And one of the points that were really important for us with our criteria in a new learning management system was something that could cater for online courses and units, and making our curriculum a lot more accessible than it had been in the past. When we decided to go with Schoolbox, we also took a step back and looked at our reporting and assessment processes. So we did a bit of an audit around the existing subjects, units and assessments, a review of reporting and what we wanted to achieve out of reporting, Developmental rubrics were a thing that we decided the teaching and learning team were bringing in and working with staff around how to assess with rubrics, how to create really rich rubrics and descriptors that map skill progression from year 7 through to the end of year 10. And why I wanted to bring this up was that I think if you're bringing in a new system, and with that new system you want to bring about some changes to your school, it's a great opportunity to align any new behaviours that you're trying to establish with your staff and align those changes with the launch of your new learning management system, if that's possible. So that when people start to use Schoolbox for the first time, they're doing it in a way that matches your new way of thinking about whether it's assessment, whether it's feedback, whether it's pastoral care. Any module within the system, if you can launch those new behaviours with the new system, then I think there's a great opportunity there for you to get greater success and build momentum moving forward, because your staff won't have any preconceived ideas as to how the technology should be used. So it's almost like a clean slate. When it comes to building courses, something that I wanted to point out, and this might be pretty low-hanging fruit, pretty obvious for a lot of people in the room, but I think naming conventions are really important, and understanding the search sensitivity of the course search. So putting in simple words like the word maths could get you a no results found if everything's named mathematics. Setting up naming conventions for things like Unit 1 and 2, Unit 3 and 4 if it's VCE, Year 7, Year 8, Year 9, Year 10, having a common naming convention for things like VCAL or VET just help make that user experience a lot easier and a lot more consistent. And when you're trying to find what you're looking for, hopefully it's a lot easier if you've got that really consistent naming convention. This is another example here. If we're looking for PE, we get a result here of specialist maths and personal development skills instead of the actual health and physical education courses. Other ideas that I wanted to mention was your school might run programs such as like a life skills or a city experience, and if you're setting up folders for your courses, you might want to think about where are those unique kind of courses that you might run, such as like a city experience or something to do with, Year 9 maybe, if you're running an alternative program at one of your year levels, where do those courses sit? So sometimes it's useful to create an extra folder to house those courses. A couple of extra ideas that we've been running with, the way we've set up some of our courses, they're not year level specific as well. So you might want to think about that if you're running certain literacy programs or numeracy programs or support programs for students. We've got some in VCAL where the course itself can be imported to class pages of various different year levels. So you don't necessarily have to tie a course to a year level, so to speak. You can import it to more than one. Another thing that we've used courses for the last 2 years, I created a course around Year 7 induction for their laptops. So there's a Year 7 laptop induction course, and I imported that to some of their class pages and had a set of tasks for them to do, and then they had to do an online submission using Schoolbox purely just to practice the process of an online submission before their actual submissions started to come in with their real subject teachers. So there's a lot of potential and scope to use courses in ways beyond the traditional subjects that you're teaching, if you can line it up with some of your extracurricular activities as well. Just a show of hands, who's already using courses and units in the room? All right, that's great. So for those people, can you have like a 30-second discussion around the table and think about, you don't actually have to do this on your device if you haven't got it open already, but how many clicks does it take you to get to your course page? Can you just have like a 10 or 20-second chat about that? How many clicks to get to your course page? Okay. All right, we might wrap that up. So, anyone getting there in 4 clicks? 4? Yep. Does that involve? Oh, it includes logging on. Oh, okay, I hadn't factored that in. Anyone in 3? Yep. Of the people in 3 clicks, are you using the courses button in the top menu? Some yes. Yep. Okay. Anyone in 2 clicks? Beautiful. Can anyone share how they're getting there in 2 clicks? 1 click to the class page and then 1 click to the course, whether it's through your course, course outline or a tile or a link. Beautiful. I thought that'd be pretty common. Anyone getting there in 1 click? Not many. Would you like to share?
Just the My Links on the side.
Awesome. All right. Now, this might sound really simple, but it's worth some consideration, I think, is adding the courses that you're currently teaching to your My Links, particularly if you are in the process of setting up courses. And it might be that you're setting up courses before you're actually using Schoolbox with timetabled classes, so you might not have a class page yet. And if you don't have a class page yet, then I think this is an absolute no-brainer to add your course pages that you're going to be teaching from to your My Links. Too often in my role, I have a teacher come and sit with me and they'll have a question about a course page or a unit page, and I watch them click on courses in the top menu and then start to either scroll through the whole school's list of courses or type in the course that they're looking for, and they might do one of those typos that I had up at the screen earlier, or even if they don't, they find the one they want and it's still another couple of clicks. And I know we're not talking about anything too dramatic here in terms of time, but if you're doing that day in, day out, then having it 1 click away I think just makes sense. So that might be a small little takeaway from today is adding your active courses to your My Links. Further to that, everyone on staff might talk about that at the time, and let's say you go back and you share the word a little bit and people add that into your My Links. When you have new staff start at your school, don't forget to tell them, all right, that's a very handy little shortcut. I think it's really useful. So we'll get on to course page ideas. And something that we did at Salesian College, and again, not necessarily saying that there's a right and wrong way of going about this, but we created a template for how we wanted a course page to look. So it was, if we look on the right-hand side of the screen here, we've got just a bit of a document, and it's nothing fancy, as you can see, because it's sort of when we were a little bit pre-Schoolbox. And we just mapped out where on the course page would we like the components to be, and what would we like the information what would we like to populate each component with. And one of the big decisions we made was we really liked some of the things we'd seen in the demo instance of Schoolbox where there were different colour schemes associated with pages. So we decided to do a different colour scheme for all course pages, had a consistent colour scheme of grey and white. And then all unit pages were going to have a colour scheme of yellow, and the class pages would have a colour scheme of navy to sort of fit in with our branding, because as you know, like all schools are governed by the marketing department and the branding when you're designing anything like this. So the reason why we wanted to do that was to help teachers, and then obviously students and parents as well, help with their understanding of grasping the concept of what each of the 3 different pages are to be used for, and how to simply be on a page and pick up straight away which level of page are you on. And over time that becomes something really obvious, but in the beginning we thought that might help users adapt to the new system more quickly. So while it probably took us more time to put in those colours on each page, it was something that we found really worthwhile. If I was doing it again, and I'm going to sort of plug this a little bit as a potential feature, it'd be awesome if where you are setting up your templates for your different page types, if you could attach a colour scheme to that, and potentially your column width as well. with the current system as is, you can't, but what you could do is you could say, okay, we're going to create all our course pages first. Let's set the default homepage color now to what it's going to be to match our course pages, and we'll create all our course pages first. Then we'll change the homepage color when we're creating all our unit pages, and then we'll change it again for when we're creating our bulk import of class pages. So that's just a thought. But for me, it would be awesome if you could attach a color scheme to a page template. This is what it ended up looking like at Salesian College at the beginning of, or late 2016, early 2017, when we brought those course pages to life. We had a bit of a subject banner across the top to help associate with the learning area. We had a semester overview down the left-hand side, some files components, but we kept that to a bare minimum. We just wanted to map our skill progressions on our course page. That was our main priority for year 7 to 10. And we had our course criteria because we wanted to map our capabilities and indicators with the rubrics that we'd be using to assess. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And our semester tiles linking to the unit pages were on the right-hand side. And this is, hopefully today, there might be a couple of things that save you some time down the track, because we thought it looked great to have 2 sets of tiles for the tile links going to each of the unit pages. Over time, what we found was that when we wanted to, when we got to the end of our first year with Schoolbox, end of 2017, and we were reviewing our courses, and we're saying, hang on, we want to actually move Earth and Space from semester 2 to semester 1 for next year. And that meant removing the tile from the semester 2 component, adding it into the semester 1 component, or renaming something and bringing the other one down. And it was probably a little bit time consuming just to rearrange your course if you're going to teach it in a different order the following year. So we've ended up sort of migrating this over time and just combining it into one larger tiles component, which just has all the unit pages in it. And that was just something that you just have that moment of, it was a good idea at the time and it looked good, but in reality, it was more practical to sort of migrate over to one tiles component. And you just sort of learn by doing. And that's the nice thing about Schoolbox is you're not necessarily going to break anything, but you're certainly going to become more efficient over time with the more things that you try. Here's a second template that we used at Marsland more recently in the second half of last year, where we actually showed staff what empty components look like before they're built. And some of these components have been renamed with terminology that the school wanted to use. So instead of having something like a files component, they've called it resources and documents. Instead of course criteria, they've called it key skills. So making that terminology specific to the common language at the school. And that can again help you, ease the transition to a new system if the terminology fits what you were currently using before that system came in. The next slide is going to show you how this template was followed by the teachers in bringing a course page to life. And this one looks fantastic in that I think you'll agree, the unit tiles are really engaging. They've been well set up. There's nice images there. You've got a course outline across the top of the page. The key skills haven't been populated here, but there's links, there's resources. But the thing that really grabs your attention here are the tiles going to each of the unit pages. I've put a little box around that first tile just to highlight, and I'll come back to this. We created a tile in amongst the unit tiles, which is for the course page itself. And while you're on the course page, that won't really serve a purpose. But when we start looking about what to do when you're on a unit page, that'll make more sense. The last component that I wanted to talk about from a course page perspective was the course criteria component. And this is really useful if you're going to be assessing using rubrics. So I'd encourage you to add this component to your course page at a course page level and fill it with the capabilities and indicators that you might be assessing on any given rubric throughout the course. And when it comes time to creating due work assessments later on using the course builder, when you turn the little toggle on to say, yes, I'm going to use a rubric, the capabilities and indicators that you've listed in this component will all appear. And you'll just be able to tick the ones that you want to use and ignore the ones that you're not using for each particular assessment. But that's certainly a very worthwhile component. I actually got a little bit thrown by a question in the teacher course which said, which of the following components could you have on a unit page? And one of the possible answers was the course criteria, and I didn't tick that because in my mind, I was thinking, no, you'd have that at a course level. So during the week, I sort of put in a help request, and James Leckie got back to me and said, no, it's okay, Clancy, you're right, it's on the course level. And I just thought, thank you for getting back to me before I speak to 130 odd people and give them the wrong advice, but I can confirm that that's all correct. We'll move on to unit pages, and here is an example of another template we used at Marcelin for populating the unit page, just to give staff a real visual as to what are they walking into, and then on the next slide, what does that look like as it comes to life. And when you're on a unit page, there's a couple of things I'd like to highlight about these tiles that I think make them work really well. One is that the naming convention for a lot of these tiles is the unit that they belong to, and then a shortened version of what that unit name is. So a lot of these names, like the one in pink in the second row, is research investigation. That might have a much longer name, but we've shortened it down so that the label on the tile doesn't cover up the whole image. And I guess the proper name for the unit is actually, Unit 1, Area of Study 3. And that's how a lot of teachers at Marcelin, VCE teachers, were thinking about their units, was which area of study is it? But we didn't want to have area of study necessarily on the tiles themselves, because we thought having something related to the topic gave users more of an insight as to what they could find out on that page, rather than just seeing area of study 3 and not being totally sure what that was about and having to click to the page to find out. So sometimes a misconception here is that the page name has to match the tile name or the tile label. That's not the case. I think if they're related, it's okay for them to be slightly different. An idea that we've been investigating as well at Salesian is the idea of a teacher-only sort of sub-page. And I get questions every now and then about, is there like a teachers-only area in the course or in the unit? And there's, I guess, depending on the permissions that you've set up, the answer could vary. The way we've set up courses and units are so that they're viewable. There's read access for students and for parents, and write access for staff. But we've created some sub-pages, and we're trialling this out, where it's only visible to staff. And it might be relevant, I guess, if you're looking at planning some of your units of work in more detail, and you only want the teachers to be able to access that. And a lot of our teachers are currently collaborating in OneNote, and they might have a shared OneNote, and what they're doing in there is, one teacher might put up the lesson plans for a certain unit, and if one teacher puts it up, everyone benefits, and you sort of, rotate that responsibility around rather than, 5 different teachers all creating the same thing week in, week out. So it's a bit of a, very much a team-orientated, collaborative approach, but we've looked at trialling that inside Schoolbox, inside our courses and units, to help, I guess, link that and make it more accessible and closer to the environment where teachers are going to be spending most of their time, rather than hopping from OneNote back to Schoolbox. Talk a little bit about the course builder and when it comes to creating due work. And again, I'll come back to that concept of not necessarily having a right and a wrong way of doing things. Here's 2 very different approaches to creating your assessment types. So the one on the left is more about when does that assessment take place? So the 3 options at Salesian College are, is it a pre-test at the beginning of a unit? Is it classwork or homework, which is done during a unit? Or is it a reportable assessment task, which is something that's more of a summative assessment towards the end of a unit? The example on the right is more focused on the nature of the work in terms of, is it an assignment, or is it an exam or a folio? Is it group work? Is it a quiz? More about the nature of the work, so to speak. And I'll talk a little bit about the advantages of having the example on the left with the 3 options as to what Salesian's been able to do with that. But again, not to say that there's a right way or a wrong way of doing it. In terms of change management, I think it's really important if you're implementing such a big change project such as a new LMS, or even if you've got the new LMS and you're just going to introduce a new module within it, try and combine the resources that are available to you. So it might be a combination of leveraging what's available to you in the Schoolbox Help forums or the teacher course, inspiration from other schools, all those sorts of things. There's some awesome resources in there. And I also think it's important to develop your own in-house resources too. I was sitting in a PD a couple of weeks ago and we were talking about assessment, and the deputy principal was sort of leading that conversation, and someone in the room said, "Oh, can't we just grab it from another school?" Which is, pretty rational thinking. If it's been done, why reinvent it? And the deputy said, that might be a starting point, is to look at what other schools are doing, but we need to localise it. And I quite like that term around making it relevant to your environment, your school setting, and making it fit the needs of your environment and the users in that space. I think that's really critical when it comes to a successful change management plan. So if you are developing your resources, break down any language barriers. One of the things I really like in the teacher course is that you can have a little glossary of terms as to what does a term mean in Schoolbox versus perhaps in your school day to day. Something like the name of a unit page, for example, can be a tricky concept for VCE teachers to, get their head around at the beginning, that a unit page is not necessarily a full unit in VCE terms, so to speak. A unit page is more of an area of study. So little things like that where you can break down those terminology barriers initially is only going to help speed up your process. And then find a place in Schoolbox to put these resources. So if you've got guidelines around creating courses and units and possibly even class pages, pop them in a space where they're easily accessible, put up some, links. There's great videos already available in Schoolbox Help around importing your courses and managing your courses. And even if the way you use courses varies slightly from school to school, these videos are a great place to start because you can't really mix it up too much. I'd be interested to see, of the audience, do people have course and unit permissions similar to what's above? Even if you've got a lot more roles than what's on the screen, do people have parents and students with read access to your course and unit pages? Yes and no? Can I get a show of hands if you're a yes? Yeah, all right, thank you. Hands down. Anyone a no? All right, cool. So that might be something to think about for the future. What we've done is we've got students and parents with read access to courses and units, and we've set up some tiles that will allow students and parents, probably more relevant to parents, allows them to navigate to any of the course pages and therefore any of the unit pages. So by creating a little button called curriculum information, and it could be called anything to be honest, you can then access a set of tiles, and there's one per faculty. You might call your faculties domains or learning areas. And so if you were to, say, click on HPE as an example, a parent would see all of the different courses that run within health and physical education from 7 to 12 at Salesian. So I've just colour-coded these. Light blue is a year 7 to 10 course, navy blue is a VCE course, and grey is a vet course. So a parent can then click within a course and be taken to the course page, and then on the course page they're going to find the tiles that link to the unit pages. So it's just a bit of scaffolding for parents to be able to navigate to any course they want. And I think this is really powerful in terms of conversations, potentially not just about the subjects their child's doing now, but subject selection for the upcoming semester or the upcoming year. Rather than waiting for a booklet to come out with all the different subject options, parents could jump onto Schoolbox at any time and start browsing through the courses and reading a bit of an overview as to what's involved in each course. I'm just going to come back now to those work types. And how this has been powerful at Salesian is that when we're looking at our courses or looking at students or data sets for a class, we can start to analyse specific types of assessment, and using the reportable assessment tasks are probably what we're most interested in. And sometimes it's comparing that to a pre-test if the pre-test is of a very similar nature. So I just wanted to sort of highlight that through some of the more recent filtering functionality that you can do in this area of Schoolbox, it's been really powerful for us to just examine the data that we want to as it relates to certain work types. So when you're creating your work types, you might want to think about which data sets do we want to take a closer look at later down the track, and perhaps map your work types with that. Again, this is just another graph where if you're using your rubrics, you can start to have a look at which of the indicators students are performing well in and which areas they might be struggling in, whether it's at a class level or a school level. A couple of quick points just to sort of start to wrap up. We've also used our reportable assessment tasks through our third-party sort of who we engage for some data analytics support, so they've embedded some of this data for us in like an extra Schoolbox dashboard. So this graph here, if you click on a student, it's part of a dashboard where you get a subject average all in one chart as to how a student's going just as an average of their reportable assessment tasks, without factoring in just your pre-tests or your homework or your quizzes or your classwork. So this is nice in that you can see a Year 10 student's subject averages, and they're actually doing Year 11 biology down the end, and so that one's got slightly lower scores for their accelerated subject. We've been able to pull in some external testing data with NAPLAN and PAT testing, which is also nice to see, all in the one place. So just to summarise, before we take questions, I thought I'd go over why it's been such a worthwhile process setting all this up. And I think undoubtedly the biggest thing is not just accessibility to our course content, but it's transformed the way our teachers work together in their teaching teams. Because when you've got a course builder on the unit page, it's almost like your point of truth around, well, what are we doing as a teaching team, and what are we going to assess, and how are we going to assess? And I think collaboration as a school, particularly at Salesian College, has been enhanced through the use of the course builder, because teaching teams are all reliant on working together to make sure that's a successful process and making sure everyone gets the right version, the most up-to-date version of an assessment, the up-to-date version of the rubric, all of those things, and importing it to their class on time, having the due dates all set at a similar time. And so those conversations have been a really good focus point for teachers, whether they're meeting in their own time or in scheduled faculty meetings. That's certainly been a really nice way of bringing our teaching teams closer together. And we've seen a lot more collaboration out of that, and a lot more consistency from class to class. So sort of gone are the days where you, as a maths teacher, might be doing an algebra test with your class that's slightly different to the algebra test that's going on next door, because you've added a bonus question at the end, or things like that. It's nice to know that we've got a lot of consistency throughout all of our assessments and our courses. So, look, I'll finish up there. If there's a few questions, I think Grant's got a microphone that might come around. I'm happy to take a few questions. There's also, my email address is on the screen, so if you don't get a chance to ask, or you're not, don't want to use the microphone today, I'm more than happy for you to touch base with me and ask away if you've got any questions, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.
Brilliant. Thank you, Clancy. We've got a couple of roaming mics getting around, so we're about 15 minutes of question time, so plenty of time to delve a little bit deeper. A few hands up, please.
Thanks, Clancy. The custom dashboard that you had up there before for the assessment data, could you go over again where that came from?
Yeah, so one of the sponsors here, ARA Analytics, they helped us with that. So I guess what we were finding is that if you wanted to just get an overview on a student, we wanted to make that easier and I guess more simple and bring in not only just, it's probably broken up in two halves. One is around assessment data. So there's 3 charts to do with assessment, which were on the screen. There's actually 3 other charts. One is a pastoral care overview, which is like a pie chart of a breakdown of the pastoral care record types that the student has received for that current semester, or if you change the date filter throughout their whole journey at the school. And the 2 other charts are an attendance breakdown of approved, unapproved, or present. And the other one is just an attendance average per subject. Yeah, so that's all. If you search for a student and click on their name and click dashboard, that's all been embedded onto a page. So you've got 6 graphs in front of you related to either pastoral care, attendance, or academics.
And is that just visible to staff?
At this point, yeah. So that's a great question. It's a conversation point moving forward as to if we do open up a dashboard for parents or students, would we tweak the one that we've currently got, or would we roll with the one we've currently got and just give them permission to see that? Yeah.
Thanks.
No worries.
Oh, hi. You mentioned that there were a few issues with project work. I was wondering if you could go into that in a bit more detail.
Oh, yep. No worries. So with projects, I guess you don't want to have a short-term fling with a project. It's a very long-term commitment in that are your tasks and quizzes and due works going to be in that project semester in, semester out, or year in, year out? Because you can't currently, I guess, drag a due work task into a project when you want to have it as part of the project, or then drag it back out if the following semester you decide, you know what, I want that to be a standalone assessment.
So I guess my follow-up question for Schoolbox would be, can you guys make it so you can do that?
So that's a very good point too. There's a few people that are building momentum around that in the forums. So
Shall I walk over to James Leckie? Have you got an answer for this, James?
So the answer from Schoolbox. So yeah, we are aware that moving assessments in and out of projects and also in and out of units is something that a lot of schools would like. The other one is duplication of assessments. Those 2, we're sort of deciding which one's higher priority. I'm tending towards moving rather than copying. I don't know if anyone's heard my thing on copying before, but I think copying always ends in creating a lot of extra data that can get out of date and out of sync very quickly. So I tend to stay away from copying, but it will probably be more likely we'll go with a move feature that will, in what my mind it's going to look like, is a send to. So you'll have the ability to click on the assessment and browse send to this unit, send to that course, send to that project. So that's sort of where our thinking is. No timeline yet, but we are aware of it. We're thinking about it as well.
Yep, cool. I was actually tempted to put a link to where it is in the forums, like if people wanted to, but I restrain myself.
Yeah, definitely put a quote in the forums for it. That's how we determine what we're going to do next. So if you do like that idea, go to the forums and find it.
We have a question over here. Yeah.
Hi. Over here, sorry.
Thank you. Cheers.
At my school, we've set the courses and units up pretty identical to how you've done it.
Cool.
So it's good to see that
Yeah,
we're
that's
on the
great.
right track.
Yep.
However, I find at the beginning of every year, or even when could be a change in curriculum halfway through the year, they've decided to study a different novel, whatever it is, I am always the one that ends up having to redo the tiles, telling the teachers you need to do your unit overview over here, your course overview over there, and the feedback I get from pretty much all the HODs at my school is, this is web design, I don't have time for it, and because I'm part of the IT department, they feel it's part of my job.
Yep.
So I was just curious who does it at your schools, I guess where does the responsibility lie at the end of the day? Because obviously I argue back, it's not just web design, it's up to you, it's your learning and learning content and etc.
Yep.
But I'm finding it really hard to push back and get them to take responsibility of just setting all that up. So.
Yep. Yeah, it's a great question. It's a tricky one because I think every school is going to have a different response. And sometimes it can be around education. So one idea is that when you create the course page, you shouldn't have to change the course page too much after it's been created. I guess you'll spend more of your time at the unit page level, but your example of needing to adjust your tiles is really, really important. So I would tend to want to empower, I guess, the domain leaders to look after those tiles and give them the training that they would need to feel confident in adding a tile, following, your style guide, if you like, removing a tile, and taking on that responsibility. If it was too much to ask the domain leaders to do that, or the faculty heads, another option is, well, each particular year you've got a team of teachers. So if there's a Year 7 English team, someone in the Year 7 English team takes ownership of that course page. And then you divvy up the responsibilities in the unit page levels as well within that team. So hopefully you could then provide training to everyone that's going to be responsible for a course page for that year. There's pros and cons with that, in that you can't always guarantee it's going to be done consistently and be done well. So sometimes the tendency is to sort of think, even though it's going to be time consuming, I'll just do it to make sure it's done well. And I've probably fallen into that trap a few times, to be perfectly honest, where I'm sort of like, I'll just do it for you because I can tell it's going to be really time consuming if you do it, and I'll be more efficient at it. But I think for long-term success, you want to empower as many other people as you can. Yeah. Yep.
This is sort of similar to the previous question about duplication, but I'm wondering more at a course level, because sometimes a teacher will have taken ownership for a course, have created it, they might leave the school and a new staff member may come in. Quite often they might want things done differently, but they won't accidentally want to delete anything important. So in that situation, having the ability to duplicate a course so that you've got a backup would be really useful. And currently I'm under the impression that that's not possible. Is that correct?
Yep. Yep.
Is there any chance of that being put in at any point?
Probably a question to answer for me. So I'll just go a bit more detail into that stance on copying. When Schoolbox first was created, we did have a copying feature, and what we found was that a lot of content was being duplicated and copied in the system, and it created many variants of the one thing. And things like a file or a form, you might find 5 different copies of the privacy policy, or 6 different copies of the course. And it became very confusing to which one was the authoritative piece. Because you had many copies of it, it was very hard to tell which one was actually the one that we use. And so we made a decision a fair while back now that we wanted to make sure that we always had the authority as the one that was up in the system. That meant that in your example, we would prefer that the teacher who's taking over that course continues to maintain and update that course and doesn't make a copy. Now, there are ways to take a download, a copy, a zip file and things like that so you don't lose things, and a lot of things are recoverable if they are accidentally deleted anyway. So I would prefer if that teacher inherited and owned that course so that you still had one authoritative copy of that course, and so that moving forward there wasn't ever an indecision about which was the right course for Year 12 VC English. It wasn't variant A, B or C, there is just one course. So that's sort of our positioning on the copying place. I think that there's still room for some forms of copying, but where in that example I'd like to see we had one authority for that version. And that's not to say you might have documents on your computer that have different variations and different plans and things like that. That's fine, but when we're going to publishing it inside Schoolbox, it's important that there is one source of truth.
I personally think that you may have to rethink about your copying issue. We at the education front, we do require copying, I believe. And I just want to ask about the class part of the course unit. Now, if you think course and units are sort of faculty-based stuff, so we get together as teachers, we work out the course page, the unit page, and then the teacher actually owns the class page. They have to, theoretically, as far as I know, at the end of that semester, they have to try to copy as much as they can from that and then redo it again for the next semester or the next year. It's absolutely critical in my mind that we should be given the copying rights to that. I think it's essential.
I actually might let James handle that one, I think.
So just on that, I think that tends to, once again, I think that goes back to the practice around courses and classes. We did design the course architecture to be a copy. So when you import a course to a class, you're actually creating a copy. And that's a very deliberate copying process. And I think that if you're getting to the end of a class at the end of a year and you're needing to copy it again, you've probably missed the opportunity to build a course at the beginning or during the year. And I think probably also there might be an opportunity there to move items as well into a better place.
The teacher works on the class. Now we, as effectively become listener, and then the teacher, during the semester, has all individual things, because we as teachers do things on the fly, and we save things. Now, it takes an inordinate amount of time to redo the same thing. I think it's essential for you to ensure that we don't have to do the same thing over and over again. That's my talk.
Hi Clancy, I've got a follow-up from a question that came at the back there about tiles. Our instance of Schoolbox has been developed over a number of years by a number of different people, and tiles at one stage was the answer to all things, and they're the bane of my existence. Because like someone already said, it's a little bit of effort for a teacher to go and create a tile, which is essentially a link to something. What we've done, what we're trying to do, and certainly courses and units now with the restructuring of pages, is to use those folder structures and turn them into grids and just drag a pretty picture into it, and it's a lot easier for a teacher to do something like that, and it has some value in its structure. My question is, I guess, is over time with early adopters of Schoolbox, where resources were everywhere, not necessarily in a consistent state, faculties doing things very differently, and trying to now consolidate those into a structure and moving things around without having to reproduce them all and breaking links. Do you have any advice or strategies around that?
Yeah, that's a tricky one when you're already down the road with it and then you're not starting fresh. I guess where possible, if you could leverage that window of opportunity where perhaps students have finished and your staff are still at school, and trying to get as much done in those PD times. And I think a lot of it sometimes can come back to time and making it a top priority for your school. So if you can get some decent chunk of time in that space, perhaps that's a really safe time to play around with things and potentially break a few links here or there without it having any real consequences because you don't have students and parents to worry about at that particular time. That would be my starting point. In terms of during the semester, yeah, that's a tricky one. I probably don't have a good answer straight off the top of my head for you.
Connect on our forums, obviously, and email addresses here. Look, guys, we're going to wrap up. We've got two more quick questions. Yep. One from this lovely lady here and one over there.
Hi.
Hi. I have found when you're doing your unit page that when you put files up on the side, it's like 1 million files down the side, and which doesn't look very good. So yep. I have been setting them up as folders and putting them onto another entire homepage sort of thing. But for some of my courses, I want the kids to still have access to that incredibly beautiful folder of resources that I've built, because they need to still refer to it in year 11 and 12. Like it's something that they did in year 10, but they need to still have access. So how can I point them to that in a different course, that folder?
Yep. Are you still teaching those students, or
Yes.
some of them potentially?
Yeah.
So you could.
But I need to have the folder accessed by more than one unit.
Yep. One thing we did for VCE Japanese was they had a composite class. So I think there was a combination of year 11s and 12s and maybe even some year 10s. I could be wrong, but all in the same class together and at different streams. So studying each unique course, but they were all in together because it was a small group. And we set up those courses in a way where you could quite easily navigate at a course level to each of those different pages. We almost created a unique set of tiles for that course so that students could quickly get to Unit 3, 4, Unit 1, 2 or Year 10, because a lot of those resources needed to be accessed by all three groups, a lot of audio files and different things. So we tried to leverage an extra set of tiles to make that more accessible. Does that make sense?
Okay, in Edmodo,
Yep.
I could set up a folder and put all the resources for a topic in there.
Yep.
And then I could share that folder to my year 11 this class and my year 12 that class and my year 10 this class. And so all of them could have that same access to a folder.
Yep.
And I wouldn't have to, like, it was very easy, to be honest. Is there any way of doing that?
Yeah, definitely. You could just add a link, on your class page. You could add the link component if you don't already have it,
Okay.
and then point that link to the folder you're talking about.
Okay,
Yeah, that might be a much easier way.
We have a quick response to that, if that's okay.
Sorry. So at our school, what we've found is best is for those kind of resources, we kind of have a common resources page, which was actually an idea that was floated to us when we first got Schoolbox. And so we'll have resources in just kind of a general faculty. So if it's like music faculty, we'll have music common components, and that will have all the resource structure. And then we just use the source linking feature in the folders to link through to that. But I'm happy to chat to you one-on-one, and our teachers find that pretty easy to get through.
Yeah, cool.
Brilliant, thank you. Last question, and then we must move on.
All right, so my question is actually similar to the copy thing. The school I work in, it's actually a big school, so we have, especially for specialist teachers, so you'll find the specialist teachers can teach maybe 18 classes. So for the class page, and every class page should be similar. So is it a way that we can copy class pages for these classes, like do one and then copy it? Or what, how it's gonna work?
No,
rather than creating 18 class pages.
Yeah. Not really, not in the current format. You can create them all with the same template, obviously.
Yeah.
And depending on the nature of the content, if some of that content is potentially, if you're able to put that on the unit page level, you could change the source to go to the unit page so it's drawing that information in straight away.
Yeah, but with sources we can only copy tiles or whatever, maybe a text box or something.
Yep.
But we can't copy the whole page.
No.
There's no way to copy all the contents at once.
No.
So the teacher have to do, like, if you've got 18 classes, she have to do 18 class pages independently. You can't really...
Potentially, but I think you might be able to create, if it's going to be anything that's static, and you're not going to...
page, but they need to link it after.
Yeah, so if there's anything on your class page that might be a static component that you're not going to edit, then you might create it once, and there's potential, depending on permissions, for you to link it. You might just need to look at what the permissions are at the source level. So sometimes the problem is if you've got a class page and only certain people are timetabled to that class, you can't change the source on another class page to read from your original class page because it'll have different permissions.
All right, okay. All right, thank you so much.
That's all right.
Thanks.
Well, thank you everyone. Fantastic questions. It's provoked a lot of thought and solutions there. Clancy, thank you so much